My guest this week is an author, the founding publisher of Skeptic magazine, a regular contributor to Time.com, a presidential fellow at Chapman University, and now a two-time guest on the Rubin Report. Michael Shermer, welcome back.
Returning champion.
Returning champion. How many weeks in a row do you think
That's
you
right.
can win?
I could do one more week if I can make it.
Well, I'm thrilled that you're back here. You also are the only guest to have two books.
Two books. Okay. All
Rubin
right.
Report.
All right.
Very impressive. Skeptic and the Moral Art.
It boosted my sales right here.
There you go. I think we did. I think we did. We'll put the link down below.
It's encouraging to see physical books. I mean, I'm one of the few people left, I think, that still likes physical newspapers, physical books. You know, I don't think it'll ever go to zero. I don't think it'll ever be all electronic publishing.
Yeah. Well, it would be too easy to burn them if it was all electronic, right?
That's right. Yeah.
It would require less work, I suppose.
Yeah.
All right. So there's a lot that I want to talk to you about, and I want to be clear with the audience that right now, when we're taping this, it's before the election, but we're going to air this after the election.
Right.
So I don't want to do too much politics, but I want to do one thing related to politics, which is very much in your wheelhouse, related to morality and ethics, which is for what you saw for the purposes of the election. Do morality and ethics have anything to do with our political process anymore?
Well, it should have absolutely everything to do with it, of course.
Right.
I mean, in terms of like the moral arc and expanding the moral sphere and so forth, we know that democracies are much better than autocracies and anarchy and dictatorships and so on. And so what is it about that does it? Well, it's the focus on individual liberty and freedom and the autonomy of individuals to have choice in the political process. So to that extent, the more that there's money and corruption and the kinds of things we see, not just this election, but really all elections, is troubling because, you know, anytime there's an interference with individual participation in the political process, given that we can't have the tyranny of the majority where we have a mob rule. We have to have a Bill of Rights, and we have to have checks and balances, and we have a constitutional republic, that's good. But still, you know, the kinds of things we've seen in both candidates, both parties, you know, we have a duopoly. You know, as libertarians complain, you know, this is a two-part, you know, it's like having only two companies. It's almost like a monopoly because they're not that far apart.
Right.
Where's the competition? You know, my wife's from Germany, and you know they have 4 or 5, you know, viable, active parties that are up there on the stage. And you know, Angela Merkel has always constantly having to make adjustments and you know bring these people in and make accommodations for that party. And you know, if we had something like that, Bernie would be right in there, and Gary Johnson would be right in there, and everybody. And so it would feel like we all have a little bit more control and power.
Right. I mean, that to me would have been the most sensible. Again, we don't know who the president is right this second. We don't know who won the election. But that would have been the most sensible thing, even to see both these parties split in two so that the Republican Party could have split into something more, you know, you would have had Trump, and then I think even better than Gary Johnson would have been a Rand Paul, someone really more traditionally libertarian.
Or even flip that ticket with Weld as the...
Or Weld, I think, would have been better. And then on the left, you have the Hillary party, that's sort of the more mainstream Democrats, and then you have the progressive version, which is Bernie. But what do you think about just sort of the ethics and morality related to truth in all of this? Because I think that, more than anything, over the course of the last year, we've seen truth, like an empirical truth, go out the window. It doesn't matter what they say because their teams back them. And then even when people tell you they're fact-checking, you know, we've got the live fact-checkers. And I'm always looking at them going, well, who's fact-checking you? That truth seems to have disappeared.
Yes, it's troubling. It is. So I always turn to the fact-checkers too. Like, okay, and you're right. Who's checking the fact-checkers and who's watching the watchers? And well, that's why we need a free press and more, you know, and different alternative media, in hopes that it doesn't seem to matter though. You know, to the candidates, once they're the main party's selected person, that's it. You know, everyone rallies around the team because of the duopoly thing. It's like, that's our team, going to back them no matter what. Yeah, what about the truth, right? Yeah. And you know, to that extent, of course, as you know, Sam Harris and I agree that, you know, there are real, factual, moral principles. I mean, they're no different than, say, biological facts or things we can discover about nature. And to that extent, you know, the long-term moral progress comes from us discovering what those are. You know, through social science, through democracy votes, just asking people, you know, what is it you want? And you know, it's a form of data collection that we get to know that. And the political process is still sort of old school. Like, these are the planks in our platform, and I'm sticking to them no matter what. Yeah, but what if this one and this one are not correct? So what troubles me most is this is my team, and I'm sticking to it no matter what. But once in a while, I'd like to hear a candidate say, you know what, I changed my mind about guns, or I changed my mind about drugs. I looked at it and I just changed my mind. That's it. It'd be so refreshing.
Isn't it funny though? We hate when people flip-flop, and yet at the same time, we want people to have flexible minds. I mean, I don't mind changing my opinions as new information is given to me, but the second a politician does, and maybe that's just because of function of our system and money, so you never know why they're flip-flopping.
Right.
But we should want people to actually change their minds, right?
Well, yes, as rational, critical thinkers, we do. But the problem with the political system, it's based on these moral foundations, the kind of the principles of our team. This is what we stand for. And so the more you vary from that, you can vary a little bit and still be accepted into the team. But if you go too far, then maybe we can't trust you on these other things. Like, okay, wait, you changed your mind on guns. Well, if you're giving up on guns, what about capitalism? What about liberty? What about, oh my gosh, you're going to go over to the crazy left, and vice versa. So instead of it being treated more like sort of a science, like, I just want to know what the truth is. What's the best way to reduce the amount of gun carnage, for example? Should we have this amount of gun control, or this amount, or this? But instead, it's more of our moral foundation is freedom to choose any, and you can have any guns you want, and so on. And if you interfere with that even a little bit, no matter what the data says, then you've sacrificed it. So we're really at two different levels: factual truth and a moral commitment to a principle.
Right. So without making this about guns specifically, so you're saying basically certain people are just staking out almost a fake moral spot, basically, and then they derive all of their other decisions are based on this fake moral positioning. So then they can get you on almost anything else.
Well, so use climate change. It's like people don't know much about it at all, but they know they're supposed to. If you're on the right, you're supposed to be against it because somehow it's against capitalism. And so whether you're measuring ice core data or tree ring data, it's like whatever. I don't know. I'm against it because it's challenging my moral principles about capitalism and free markets. So it really has nothing to do with climate at all. It is a fake posturing. It's a signaling theory, costly signaling theory. I'm signaling to my team, you can count on me. I don't care what the data is. I'm against that.
So that's interesting. So right behind me right here, I have a book by Alex Epstein, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. And I don't know that I ever got more of a pushback ever on any show that I've done than when I had him on. Most of the people were saying, well, he's denying climate change, which I don't think he specifically does. He argues with some of the science around it. But by just titling it that, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, you've got the moral arc there. How would you, in general, deal with someone that if you don't believe their thesis to start with, how would you go about having the conversation? Because I genuinely wanted to hear his ideas. I knew that certain amount of people read this book and really liked it, some people that I respect, and I read it, and then I thought, I want to hear these ideas, but at the same time, I don't want to shout him down every time he says something that I might disagree with or whatever. How do you deal with that?
Well, you're about as good as it gets on doing that without being, you don't want to be too confrontational, because the moment you say, well, your position is it's a bunch of bullshit and you're wrong, the wall goes up. Cognitive dissonance kicks in. You double down on your position. You're not even listening to the other arguments. You really need to show, I'm listening to you. I really just genuinely want to know, what is your argument? I do this with like the Holocaust deniers. What is it you're claiming here? Just tell me, what's your best arguments? Or the creationists, what's your best arguments? And they'll usually tell you if they feel like you're listening. You don't have to agree. You can just say, I'm not sure I agree, or you might say, like I have with Case of the Creationists, because I used to be one. Well, I used to, when I was a Christian, I used to believe the creationist stuff, and you did? Yeah. So tell me, what are the new arguments? And then they want to know, well, how come you don't believe that anymore? Like, ooh, could this happen to me? And, and you show that it's easier to get somebody to change their mind if you were in their seat once. So they feel like, you're showing me respect, you're listening to me, so I will listen to you. It's a kind of a quid pro quo. It's a perspective taking.
And by the way, I know that you actually put this into practice because you tweeted something really beautiful You were speaking, just a couple of weeks ago, and someone asked you, what was the exact question? I don't want to muck it up. And then you tweeted your response about, why wouldn't I cheat on my wife?
Oh, yes, yes. Right, well, so, I was debating a Christian apologist at Biola, the Bible Institute of LA. So, so I'm in a room full of born-again Christians, oh boy. And so the guy, I just don't get it. Why, if there's no God, what's the foundation for morals? Where is the external source of absolute morality? And so I said, are you married? And yeah, is your wife here? No. Well, so tonight's your big night. Let's say I talk you into, there's no God. You get convinced by me. Maybe would you cheat on your wife? And he said, well, I might. I went, oh, glad your wife's not here to hear that. But why? I mean, he says, well, why wouldn't I? I mean, according to you, we're just, electric meat. We're stardust. 1,000 years, we're all dead. Doesn't matter anyway. So why not?
Yeah.
I say, well, how about because you love your wife and you promised her you wouldn't, and you wouldn't want her doing that to you, and you don't want to hurt her, and you wouldn't want to live in a society where everybody just cheats on one another and no one honors their principles, contracts, or word. And he was like, oh. And I don't think that, he didn't really understand that or didn't know that. He had to know that at some level.
Right.
And of course, if his wife was there, she'd go, yeah, you idiot. But
I think this has nothing to do with God.
But I think because he's in the bubble, in that team, in that moral group of, this is what we believe. There has to be an external source for morality. God is that external source, and I'm just not going to think about it much beyond that.
Yeah.
So when you give him a few arguments, it's like, oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Then it's just obvious once you say it.
Do you think it matters if someone gets their morality from an external source, if their morality is good? Even if it's based on something that's unprovable?
In the short term, no, I don't care. As long as they're not flying planes into buildings or bothering me or killing me or whatever, I don't care.
Right.
To that extent, certain religions that lead people to say, man the soup kitchens, give money to the Hurricane Katrina disaster relief, that kind of stuff. That's great, good, okay, fine. If that makes the world a little bit better place, that's good. In the long run, it's probably better if the reason you do it is inherently in itself rather than for some reward system in the afterlife, or because God is watching or something like that. To me, an internally motivated moral system is a superior one. I'm doing it just because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And usually at this point, Hitler comes into the conversation. Yeah, but then that so yeah, but okay, forget Hitler. That we've made progress.
Well, you're not arguing that people can't do bad things based on their own decisions.
Of course, they do bad things.
Because they do bad things,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So then that's a perfect segue to free will, which I want to really get into with you.
Oh, right.
Because Sam Harris, launched my first version of the show last year, relaunched with him the second time a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And we went into free will, and I reread it's barely a book. It's what would we call that? It's a small
booklet.
It's a booklet.
Yeah.
All right. It's a booklet.
Yeah.
And and I told him this when he was sitting right there. I said, the whole time I was reading it, I really wanted to disagree with him, because by his argument about that you don't have free will, it made me feel sort of powerless as a person. And then he laid out his case of why we don't have free will. You don't quite agree with that, but would the best way to be to start here with you maybe summing up his version of it first?
Generally, the positions you can take is you could be a libertarian in the free will sense, and that's the smallest cohort of people who study this. That is that somehow we have some decision-making machinery in our brain or a soul or something like that. Almost nobody accepts that. Then there's the determinist position, which is about the same size as those libertarianists. Then the largest cohort, about 60% of
Wait,
professional...
can you just, for people that don't know, the determinist...
The determinist position, so this would be Sam's position. And he is today probably the most articulate defender of that position. In his book, his interviews with you and other things he's done, he lays it out as clearly as anybody probably ever has. Right, so if you're a determinist, this is your man. He's going to make the best arguments. That is, everything we do is determined by previous causal vectors. So there's a causal net to the universe. We live in a determined universe. Our genes, our upbringing, our peer groups, all the things that we have no control over have shaped our neurons and our genes to be a certain way. And these things just bubble up in our brains. Thoughts pop in, behaviors happen over which we have, well, no control if you're a determinist.
So quite literally what he would say is that the cosmic stew and all of your experiences that brought us right this very moment to this place, that I actually would not choose to either throw this glass of water at you or not, because I would only do it if the choice had actually been made along the roadmap in front of me. That basically is the argument.
That's right. I think on this show, Sam used the argument that most of us discuss is the Charles Whitman in the University of Texas bell tower shoots people, left a note at his apartment before he did this. If something's wrong with me, I just know there's something wrong with my brain after I'm dead. Autopsy. So they did, and sure enough, there's a tumor in his brain. Okay, and there's other cases like I read about in the Moral Arc, the other famous case of the pedophile, the 44-year-old man who suddenly has pedophilic thoughts and then actions about his stepdaughter. So the wife puts a kibosh on that, turns him into social services. He's in big trouble. And then they discover he's got a brain tumor near the hypothalamus that affects this. They take the brain tumor out, and he no longer has pedophilic feelings at all. The kiddie porn on the computer is gone, and he's back to normal. And then all of a sudden, the wife catches him again with the kiddie porn and stuff. Scan his brain, the tumor's back. Okay, so Sam's argument is that it's all tumors. Now, we would say, oh, well, but he has a tumor. He's not really a pedophile, or Charles Whitman wasn't really a homicidal maniac killer. He had a brain tumor. The determinist position is you and I have backgrounds that are like tumors. We just can't see it in a brain scan, but all the neural networks that are laid out that cause you to throw the glass or not, or shoot the person or not, is just the same.
It's just there.
Yeah.
And that he lays out a good case for it.
Absolutely.
And I'm there, I'm sort of there, and now we'll get to your rationalization.
Yeah. Well, okay, so what is the difference between...
Because if I throw a glass of water at you while we're doing this, we're going to have a whole other conversation, I think.
And then I might throw the glass back, although I normally wouldn't. Yes, yeah. But what is the difference between, say, a brain tumor and you and I just sitting here without brain tumors? And it has to do with what Dan Dennett calls degrees of freedom. That is, to what extent do you have control over your behavior? And instead of seeing it as just a black and white, two categories, you're either free or you're totally determined or totally free, Dan lays out a case that it's a spectrum. So insects, say, have very few degrees of freedom. It's all instincts. They have a very simple, they don't even really have brains. It's these little neural nodules. And say, rodents have more degrees of freedom than insects, but fewer than dogs more than rodents, chimpanzees more than dogs, us more than chimps. And within the human spectrum, you have the brain tumor, the Charles Whitmans on the one end, and say you and I are just regular people without tumors or whatever, and you have drug addicts and and alcoholics and people that have certain conditions that give them fewer degrees of freedom. Now, it's not freedom in the libertarian sense, but it's you're going along the pathway. The insect can only ever do this. The dog can do these two, and we can do all five. Now, what's doing the choosing? Well, you are. Well, Sam would say, yeah, but there is no you. It's just neurons firing. Well, okay, so Benjamin LeBay's famous experiment where the scientists can tell which one you're going to choose before you even know, because these motor neurons are firing subconsciously, and we can read that on a brain scan. So, yeah, but you can override it, free won't, and that's a different part of your brain. In any case, it's all your brain. So it's bubbling up from you. You're overriding, your cortex, your prefrontal cortex is overriding the impulses bubbling up from it. And then some other part is choosing to override the overrider. It's all still you making the decision, more than, say, the dog could. And it's a little bit of a linguistic game.
Right, so that's where I almost think we're...
Yeah, what do you mean by choose? Okay, these words, volition, choice, freedom, it becomes problematic. And I think this is why it's an insoluble problem, because of language and of just how we talk about it. All scientists say we live in a determined universe. That's a given. Okay, well then how could there be freedom? Well, okay, so let me return. I thought about this. Here's an example. So now Sam is married. I know his wife. They have a great marriage, and he's a super moral guy. The chances of him cheating on his wife are very, very low, but they're not zero because he's a human.
Even though God's not watching.
Even though God's not watching, but they're not zero because he's a human. So let's say it happens.
Okay.
You know, he's at a conference, whatever. Something happens, and he does it, and he gets caught, and his wife confronts him. And he says, well, honey, see, it's tumors all the way down. You know, my neurons, my genes, you know, I had this long pathway that led me to, you know, I didn't make that choice. It just happened. You know, how could he even finish the sentence before, you know, before she slapped him upside the head?
Right.
In a practical sense, it's a useful fiction of that we do feel like we're making choices, and you really could have done different. Maybe the brain tumor guy can't do different because he has little control over his brain. But without the brain tumors, and there really is a difference, it's not tumors all the way down. There's a difference between sort of networks of choice that are in there where you really could have done different, you know, and you know, that's the best analogy I can come up with.
So a lot of people asked when I talked to Sam about it, they said, you know, some people said I agree with them, some people said I disagree, but a lot of people said, why does it matter?
What does it matter?
That seemed to be the biggest takeaway of everything. Why does it matter? Which I understand at some level. It's like we're talking this out, but at the end of the day, whether it's all the primordial stew and every event that I've had that leads me to not have the free will, or whether it all leads me to have it, why does it actually matter?
Well, I think it does matter for the legal system, for example. In Germany, again, where my wife's from, they have a criminal justice system that's more focused on rehabilitation and what's called restorative justice versus retributive justice. Now, America is sort of steeped in this Judeo-Christian moral system in which you punish the sinner and the transgressor. They must get their just deserts. It's very Old Testament.
Yeah.
And, you know, for all the Christian talk on the right, you know, they're not very forgiving when it comes to that sort of thing. You know, fry him an old Sparky, you know, at the electric chair, you know, give him.
Are we still doing the electric chair? There is one somewhere, I think. Is there?
I don't think anyone's doing the electric chair anymore, no.
Right,
the problem was, you know, people's heads caught on fire, and it was upsetting to the people watching and so on. There's only 4 states, it's legal in 31 states. There's only 4 that really practice it: Texas, Oklahoma, Ohio, and Florida. And even there, except for Texas, they've executed 514 people since 1982. So they're pretty active. But state of California, we haven't executed anybody since, I think, the 90s. And, you know, most of them die of old age. So it's really kind of a barbaric practice. So, and the reason is because we've come to understand that in a utilitarian sense, if we want to improve society, the old country western song, you know, just hang them all and let God sort it out, is not the best way to make a better society. And in part, it's because of a better understanding of the brain. So this would be an argument for determinism in a way. In Germany, most of the criminals live in these apartment-like cells. You know, the doors, they can go in and out, they're not locked. You know, they have a lot of freedom, and the whole point is to give them classes and education, and you got to get them out of here and back into society working.
Yeah.
And it works pretty well. I mean, not for the super crazies, the extremes, the psychopaths, and you know, even Sam would agree. You know, don't let the crazy psychopaths and the pedophiles out. Don't let them out. You know, we're not there yet to rehabilitate them. But America is mired in that Old Testament. You know, don't let any of them out. Just hang them all.
Yeah.
And so we're pretty slow on that. So there are consequences to that.
Yeah. Is that one of the big flaws, I guess, of the Old Testament, that morality is sort of really detached from it? You know, we're based in Judeo-Christian laws here.
Right.
I don't think most people are walking around thinking that the actual laws that they live under are based in religion, but there is a religious component. But you're given a great example of why that has very little to do with something that is actually moral.
Yes, well, and the criminal justice system doesn't, well, this is part of the problem with the restorative justice movement points they make is that the victim isn't restored. You know, when the state tries somebody, they don't give any money to the victims, or they don't restore the damage, the stolen car or the person that died. You know, what? So,
well, I guess you could sue for punitive.
So that's civil court. You got to go to civil court. The Goldmans had to sue O.J. in civil court to get the damages. Even if they had found O.J. guilty and he spent the rest of his life in jail, that doesn't help the Goldmans. So
that's an actually really interesting point. So just to be clear, he got off free. They said he was innocent, or there wasn't enough evidence.
Right.
But he lost the civil case.
Yes.
Because it has a lower threshold.
Yes.
So they were able to get money, and everyone knew OJ did it.
Well, if you could collecting is
right. If you could collect, but in effect, in theory, they got money or whatever they got. I don't even know if they ever got it actually. But it's just an interesting thing that we have these two sort of courts with different levels of the burden of proof is different, thus creating a strange.
So part of the restorative justice movement is that they actually try to introduce the victim and the perpetrators, and get them in a room like this, and they talk. And most of these young men, they have no idea. Oh, I just robbed the house, whatever.
Yeah.
And I do it every night. It's like partying, and they have no idea the damages they do to people psychologically. And so they learn by talking to them. Yeah, you ruined my life, dude. I mean, it's just so upsetting. I couldn't work for months and. Wow, really? I mean, I couldn't imagine it wouldn't bother me. Yeah, well, because you're a psychopath.
Yeah.
So you try to train these people. Adrian Raine has a good book that I talk about in The Moral Arc. His book is called The Anatomy of Violence. He's a psychiatrist. He's one of the first to scan the brains of psychopaths and serial killers, and showed that their prefrontal cortex is pretty much shut down. So they have all these impulses bubbling up and no brake on them. And so they just impulsively act out, and most of their violence is done that way. And so his idea was, this isn't going to happen in the next century or so, but ultimately you could somehow fix the brains, genetic engineering, brain chemistry, whatever, drugs, something like that. And that would be the ultimate rehabilitation.
Right.
So you could get them back into society.
Do you think there would be a moral risk with something like that? If we could ultimately, we'd almost be engineering, even though it's a flaw, I suppose, in our brain, but that we'd ultimately be engineering out something that is very human?
Well, it would have to be done selectively. Obviously, you don't want to remove the person's. Well, like one of the complaints about some of these drugs is that they dampen all emotions, and a person just has a flat affect for like ADHD and some of these drugs that people take. Yes, there's always the risk of side effects. But if the choice is we let him out and he's a killer or a rapist, or we keep him in at $100,000 a year to the state, those are neither one of those good options. So let's try something. We're not there yet for those serious ones, but something like chemical castration for pedophiles, it doesn't appear to work that great. But that's the idea. Yeah. Somehow fix it so that the impulses are not there anymore.
Right.
And train them to to have some self-control. So one of the points Pinker makes in his great book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, is that and he's citing Norbert Elias's book, The Civilizing Process, is that over the course of about 500 years, Europeans learned to control their impulses, just like books of etiquette and self-control, like what you should and shouldn't do at a party, and when you meet people and you stay at a hotel, things you don't urinate in the corner, and don't pick the meat off the table with your fingers, and just basic stuff that we take for granted as second nature. People have to be taught that.
Yeah. And
so one of the expansions of the moral sphere is to learn to control our impulses. And we can learn that. So back to the free will, you can learn to control your willpower. You can read those books on willpower, like Roy Baumeister's book, Willpower. Here's the things you can do to train your brain when you have those impulses. Like don't go shopping on an empty stomach because you're going to buy ice cream and cookies and stuff you shouldn't eat.
Right.
And when you fill out the breakfast card at the hotel, do it the night before when you're full, so you put the granola instead of the bacon and eggs the next morning. But there's 100 things like that you could do to train. But here's back to the free will. You're freely choosing to control your own impulses. That's still you doing it. And you can do otherwise.
Right, and that's where it really comes down to semantics, though, because Sam's argument would go back to, well, you're controlling it, but you're only controlling it within the subset that your humanity can sort of give you.
So just one final thing. So there was a big survey done in 2013 of 3,300 professional philosophers, professors, and graduate students. So these are all either PhD philosophers or getting their PhDs. And they asked them like 50 different, their positions on 50 different big issues in philosophy, one of which is free will. So 59% were compatibilists, which is my position, Dan Dennett's position, maybe Sam's, maybe, against the words.
Yeah.
That we live in a determined universe, you don't have libertarian free will. But in some way, you are making choices. Maybe it's a useful fiction, but it's a very good useful fiction because we have to live in the world, and you feel like you're making choices. Only 12% and 13% were libertarians and hardcore determinists. Then the rest were other, whatever that is.
Yeah.
So either that 59% are just not thinking it through clearly enough to see that the deterministic position is the correct one, or it's not a soluble problem.
It's just not yeah.
Because of the language, and how could the universe be determined and we make free?
Right. That's sort of where I see the for whatever splitting hairs that we're at between you and Sam on that. That's kind of where I see. Something that you said about just controlling our impulses and something, it's almost as if the more we control our impulses, and I don't mean our impulses to kill or do really horrible things, but sort of basic impulses. I was thinking of Downton Abbey. Did you watch Downton Abbey by any chance? So they had the rich landowners and all the people that were rich and wealthy and had everything upstairs, and they had all the people, the servants downstairs. And after watching the entire series, it became obvious to me that the people downstairs who had much less, who had to live sometimes eating scraps or struggling for life, in a lot of ways were much happier than the people who sort of controlled all of their impulses through society. Right. So there's something connected to happiness there too, right?
It could be, yes. I don't know. I haven't seen the show, so I don't know the
Well, not even specifically about the show, but the
Yeah.
idea that sort of controlling your impulses to sort of fit in a societal thing may not be the key to happiness.
Sure, you could overdo that, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, happiness. Okay, so much of it, happiness does have to do with to what extent you have some control over your life. So people in dictatorships and totalitarian regimes have almost no control, and their happiness levels are much lower, also for other reasons, also poverty and so on. But we know from other studies on happiness that people just having choices, the more choices, for the most part, makes them feel just happier, just for what self-satisfaction or whatever.
Yeah.
So there is a relationship there. Also having goals and having a meaningful work and relationships and things like that all contribute to it. Money, there's it gets you to a certain level, but not beyond.
Do all of those things? Do you think they all have a tipping point? I mean, either with choices or with money, it's like, if you're going to buy a couch, if you had 20 couches, it seems manageable. But now online, you could look through, you could spend your life, and people go into these holes where they spend their life worrying about this minutia. So there are almost all of these things, and money too.
Right.
Do you think there is a sort of tipping
Absolutely,
point?
There's a tipping point. Right. Well, so we developed cognitive strategies. One of them is called satisficing, in which you're standing there in the sea of on the wall of toothpastes. You could spend 2 hours going through them all, and I like the blue one. Boom, next. Or the one that I always get, or the couches. Yes, I just bought a couch.
Must have been a nightmare.
Yeah. Oh, it's like, oh my God. Right. Yeah. So at some point you just go, oh fuck it, I'm just going to do this one. I like the blue one or the gray one or whatever. And so actually much of life is like that. Without emotions, like people with damage to the amygdala and the limbic systems that flatten their emotions and have the hardest time making choices. Their rational brain still works. They can do the calculations. This one has this many calories. This one has this much fat, and this one protein. Which bar should I get? Actually, that's not productive. These people have a hard time even leaving the house.
Yeah.
What should I do next? And you think about it and think about it. Most of our decisions are actually made spontaneously, emotionally, sort of an intuitive, instinctive, rapid cognition. It's called. Process. So in terms of making a choice, should I go to this college or that college? If it's really right down to two and you can't tell, it really doesn't matter which one.
Yeah. And that's really the only way that human society could flourish, right? Like ultimately it would have to come down to something that's sort of innate in us. Otherwise we would be caught forever in battling out the endless options of everything.
Now, where it gets interesting, where we started with politics and morality, there's something called libertarian paternalism. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
I don't think so.
Well, so the overarching thing is called choice architecture. So, like for example, on your California driver's license, you can punch a tab that says you'll be an organ donor. You will volunteer to be an organ donor. And so California gets whatever percentage of people that do that. In Oregon, you are going to be an organ donor unless you punch the tab that says, I opt out.
Ah.
So the opt-in versus opt-out, Oregon has a much higher rate of organ donation for that very reason. So who makes that decision? Politicians.
Right.
You know, the state senate or the state constitution or whatever makes that decision. So in a way, you know, politicians are saying, well, you still have choice. You don't have to give your organ, but we know that if we give people the chance to opt out versus opt in, it's going to have a different rate of participation.
Man, so what does that say about humans right there? I mean, does that just say something about our Western laziness or something? Because this is a big choice. Regardless of whether you think you're going to heaven or you just turn to dust or whatever it is, that's actually a fairly big life choice, so to speak, whether you're going to, you know, use your organs to help other people or not. And just simply by opt in or opt out, forcing them to click opt out is going to get you higher. Right? What does that say about just laziness?
Well, intellectual laziness, but also just a lack of rational calculation about these things, and most people aren't good at that. It's like this principle has been applied to like corporations and healthcare programs or retirement programs for the employees. Most employees, they don't even want to sit and read through the 20 different investment options for their 401k. So usually what the company will do is say, well, we're giving you this one. Now, you don't have to take it. You can take this one over here if you want, but studies show this one in the long run will be the best. This one's slightly riskier, could pay off more, could lose more. You can opt out of this one and go for that one if you want. Most take this one. And so paternalistically, the CEO and the board have decided, well, we think it's best for our employees that they do this, but we don't want to force them.
Right.
So that's the libertarian paternalism.
There's some libertarian element to it.
Yeah, right.
Well, I know that's true because when we started this company, the production company that handles Rubin Report, and I was getting health insurance, and the guy sent me this page of 50 different things, and I immediately wrote back. I wasn't going to go through that, and I said, "Can you give me 3?"
Yes, right.
And I'm not even sure I really looked at the 3 enough. I picked the best one out of 3, and that was that. But that just so it's sort of we're intellectually lazy, but we're also maybe that's just a function of 21st century minds. Our patience is thin. Our
people don't have the time
to,
people don't have the time to go through all that stuff, or they don't even understand it. I mean, some of these are pretty complex. These investment tools are super complex. The healthcare programs are complex. So this is the idea that libertarians don't like too much, but in fact works better, is if you have some committee of experts that sort of goes through these things, and they're not going to force us to do it. We want our freedom, but they give us the choices and limit the choices just because it's what's best. So we are in a way making decisions for what it's sort of the trolley problem. What is really the best way? There's people dying that need organs. Where can we get the participation level is kind of low, so let's just change the choice architecture. You are given unless you opt out. Right. And other states go, well, we don't want that. Okay, fine. So we have 50 experiments running at any one time on all these different issues, and I think this is a way in which politics and science intersect. In a way, those are social experiments. Mm-hmm. This state has income tax, this one has no income tax, this one has progressive tax, flat tax, regressive tax. You can sort of look at all the experiments and see the outcomes to whatever extent. It's a little messy.
Right.
And then you can say, well, I want that one. Okay, you can move there, you can try to change the laws in your own state, and then those are all experiments.
Yeah, so you're really making the best argument for, not to bring this back to politics, but you're making the best argument for states' rights, really. Because what you're saying, these are all incubators, basically, and the hope is that which ones work will eventually trickle up to the federal level.
I tend to prefer states' rights over the federal power, just because there's more choice. And in the last chapter of the Moral Arc, I speculate in the long run, maybe in a few centuries, nations will fall into disuse, borders will become ever more porous, they already are economically, and more politically, and we'll kind of return to the old city-state. Because, people like Stuart Brand from the Long Now Foundation projects that something like 80% of the world's population will live in cities by 2100. So cities is where the action is, and it's where it's the economic choices and freedom and prosperity, and so why not just have city-states and people just live wherever they want? This would remove the nation-state. Too much power in a nation, in a single individual. We're concerned, what if Trump has the power or Hillary has all that power, whoever.
Well, I guess the argument against that would be that the city-states would eventually have the same goals as nation-states, right?
Well, yeah, maybe that could happen, but the more the power is dispersed amongst actors, political actors, then the less likely any one person will get power. And so to return it to Hitler, there's good arguments now to be made that no Hitler, no Holocaust, no Hitler, no World War II. I mean, he was really the sole architect that made that happen, even against the wishes of most of his underlings who thought, oh, I don't know, it's such a good idea, this war thing. Look what happened in World War I and so on. And but had he not come to power, probably none of that would have happened. That's too much power in one individual. That's what scares me about big political units.